Hi, I'm Paul. Welcome to my London studio. In my work as a designer, I spend a lot of time thinking about the places where we lead our lives and how we can make them better. Whilst being stuck inside my studio throughout most of 2020, I guess like everyone else was at home, I've started to reconsider the approach I had to my work. I've realised that it wasn't enough for me to think about those places simply from the safety of my studio. And I've decided that what I really have to do is to go out there into the real world and encounter them myself. So this is that journal. I call it Where We Live. So that might have sounded all well and good, but honestly, for about 6 weeks, that is as far as I got. Most of you don't know who I am. I'm not really a filmmaker. I'm not even very good at social media. And no matter how excited I was to get started, such a blank slate can be a pretty terrifying thing for anyone. However, I was determined to get over this fear, so I decided to go and visit a place that not too long ago had to start off as a blank slate itself. So I came here, Poundbury. Despite what it might look like, the story of Poundbury started from nothing less than 30 years ago, when in 1988, the town decided it had to grow and build new homes. An empty piece of land was chosen on the land belonging to the Duchy of Cornwall, or Britain's heir to the throne, Prince Charles. With a keen interest in architecture, Charles saw Poundbury as an ideal opportunity to test his ideas on how he thought people really wanted to live. On the drive down to Poundbury, I had come across a number of these large new housing developments as they're currently springing up all across England. Samey brick houses along straight streets, often located on the edges of busy A-roads. Poundbury was different. It was immediately obvious that the designers had worked very hard to create a diverse street scene, attempting to give every building its unique character, while still creating a pleasing and harmonious whole. Well, the result was almost scarily picturesque. Every street, square and alleyway seemed to have come straight out of one of Charles's watercolour paintings. As a young designer, I was taught in no uncertain terms that such traditionalist architecture was best left where it belonged, namely in the past. And it was easy to find things to criticise about Poundbury. Having read this morning how incredibly successful it is, but it feels from walking around that I would say 70% of all the available flats and places are empty. There's poor access to public transport, hardly any private outdoor space, and extortionately high real estate prices. I was also mystified by the frankly absurd mix of architectural styles. And it'd be nice if we had essentially a very quick sequence of cuts, where I stand in a place and just call the name of wherever I am. How about this English market town? We're in the Lake District, North London. That's Imperial St. Petersburg. Brooklyn Harborside. Genuinely trying incredibly hard not to be dismissive, right? I'm not trying to make fun of it because in some odd way, I'd like to live here, right? And despite such shortcomings, it was pretty obvious that Poundbury had gone a long way beyond any one-size-fits-all housing development. And still, I myself felt never very comfortable there. Where you kind of just go, yeah, it's quite nice. But in a different way you think, isn't this the sort of place where murders happen, right? Having spoken to a number of people who lived here about their reasons for moving to Poundbury, I was somewhat startled by the answers they gave me. Rather than its architectural character, they were overwhelmingly quite ordinary. Broken relationships, kids being bullied at school, or just wanting to live somewhere where they can walk to the shops. Against such a grand architectural backdrop, I had been expecting wealthy aristocrats and fashionable ladies and elegant sports cars. I was somewhat startled by this realization and by the seeming disconnection between Poundbury's utopian ambitions and its everyday realities. To me, Poundbury felt too bittersweet. A half-forgotten memory of a more wholesome and harmonious time. But also a stark reminder of its creator's fundamental disconnection with everyday life in the UK. The topic that always comes up is the idea of choice. What can people choose, what can't they choose? And the Duchy seems to be very much in control of what door colours people can use and what types of windows, what's allowed and what isn't. And whilst that creates a pleasing whole, I think for some it's a frustrating experience, not knowing how to express individuality or how to make home. And so it finally hit me what Poundbury had reminded me of all this time. It was a giant model train set. Before anyone moved here, Poundbury had already been finished. And there was no space in its delicate harmony for the ideas, aspirations and problems of its inhabitants. Today, even 20 years after the first of its neighbourhoods had been completed, there are still no real signs of life. No unattractive front gardens, no posters, no extensions, no alterations. Everything had been meticulously designed and strictly regulated. Maybe that's where it lacks reality. It seems to take all the things that are beautiful about living in England, but maybe those things that are beautiful contrast much more brightly when they're set against the things that aren't. And if you take those everyday banalities away, what remains is just a bit of a shell. In other words, Charles had built his perfect model train set town, and now all the glue had dried, no one was allowed to play with it. Still, it felt unfair to pass a final judgment on Poundbury without at least visiting its bigger and older neighbour, Dorchester, about 20 minutes walk away. And what I found could not have been any more different than the beautiful but eerily quiet streets of Poundbury. This scene was not nearly as picturesque as the main square in Poundbury. The buildings clashed, the shops clashed, and sometimes the people clashed also. It was not harmonious, but it was real. In my experience, I believe that any place that has grown naturally over time looks the way it does for a reason. And even though today these reasons might be unknown to us, I still think that we relate to these places on a more fundamental level. The problem is that the opposite is not true. Only because we admire an old building for its sense of place or feeling of history, simply building a new building in an old style does not bring with it these characteristics. So sadly, Poundbury felt as desperately well-meaning as it fell desperately short. The millions spent on traditional design, local building materials, and all the pastel colour palettes maybe stood in the way of developing an honest, if less grand, identity. It's not just the age of a building that gives its roots, it's the way it was made by its inhabitants. Poundbury needed to find beauty in uncontrollable, banal reality. Yeah, the result might not be as picturesque, but it would be a real home to real people. Maybe it just needed to learn to let go and live a little. So I guess in my visit to Poundbury, there was also something to take away from my personal dilemma on how to start this journal. To be honest with you, I'm still pretty terrified of this blank slate, but I've come to realize that this fear can easily lead me to fits of control freakery, trying to plan the next 100 videos in one go. And it's in this fear that the real world might mess up my perfect ideas that it's easy to forget the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place, namely to reconnect with this imperfect world, to re-engage. So, when starting off with a blank slate, I guess I have to give up on my ideas of perfection and harmony and let the world write its own stories. Otherwise, it would be too easy to end up with a perfect model train set, but without anyone to play with.